we asked the gait and the foot. Thank you. So first of all, so gaits are actually pretty easy, but a lot of people get confused and bogged down, I think, because of how much different terminology there is and all the different ways of teaching it. You know, animals move in two basic ways, right? So there are, you know, here's my little pretend animal. Here's the front legs. Here's the back legs. Either they're scissoring their legs or they're scissoring their bodies. So like when a rabbit is bounding, you know, its body is doing the scissoring. When an animal, when a deer is walking, its legs are doing the scissoring. When it increases its speed into a lope or a gallop, its body starts doing the scissoring action. And so then everything else is sort of refinements and variations within those two major categories. When the legs are doing the scissoring, you end up with a really nice consistent pattern of tracks, of pairs of two tracks. So you'll end up with like front and hind tracks landing on top of each other. So like, you know, here's a front and a hind, a front and a hind, and a front and a hind in this nice little zigzag. Or the hind track might be stepping just beyond it, but you still have that pair of two, pair of two, pair of two, some variation of that, right? So it's groups of two tracks in a consistent pattern. That's if the legs are doing the scissoring. When the body does the scissoring, you end up with groups of four tracks in like a group where it's like, you know, front, front, hind, hind, and then a space, and then front, front, hind, hind, or something like that. Or like, you know, a rabbit where it'd be front. You can't really see these at all. You know, I don't know. That's not perfect. Okay, so if you could do front, front, and then the two hinds side by side, right? Front, front, hind, hind, and there's a gap. So that's what happens when the body is doing the scissoring action instead of the legs. Does that make sense to people? And so when you approach a gait, that's the first thing to look for is, are you seeing pairs of two tracks in a consistent pattern, or are you seeing a wide variety of spacing between the tracks? And so when I approach this gait here, I see one track here, and immediately I start thinking, well, is there one on top of it? Could it be two tracks? And I look around and I'm like, nope, that looks really clean. Like that's just one track right there. And then here's a big space to this next one. And then here's a smaller space. And then here's another larger space. But then up this way and that way, there's nothing, right? The other thing is there's dew claws showing up in every track here. Dew claws show up when animals are moving fast a lot. So that's a good clue. I mean, you see a lot of cracking in the mud and stuff. There's a lot of speed happening here, right? So there's a lot of action, and that also kind of pushes you into a faster gait, which would be like a lope or a gallop. In a trot, we might have the front and hind feet won't necessarily be on top of each other. There could be a space, but it's going to be that consistent pattern continuing on and on and on. So what you could find is something like this, you know, a front and a hind, but then you'd expect to come up here and see front and a hind, but you don't. And then back here you'd expect to see two as well.
I thought I was trying to make that into a track, so they were, you know, this one here was kind of a little, you know, kind of threw it off, but that looked consistent. I thought maybe somebody had stepped there, but I wasn't.
Yeah,
you know, that's what I was trying to. So that's where I was, you know, why I was looking at that. It seemed really consistent, except for that one guy right there.
Well, and so then the next piece that's helpful is to identify the feet, right? And here we're fortunate enough that you can actually, I mean, telling lefts and rights from a single deer track can be really hard, to impossible. If you just see a single track somewhere, then sometimes you just can't tell. But here we have these dew claws, and you can tell side by side of the trail. But you know, so right here, you know, there's the two dew claws right there. They're fairly close to the track, and they're pointed outward, which is what happens in front tracks of deer.
So would you say that again?
Yeah. So the dew claws on the front track are closer to the track, and they angle outward. On the hind track, they're further away, and they're angled more forward. and I can try to draw a little picture of that in the sand if the sand will let me. But so here's it's really hard to see. It's just not showing up well. So here's the deer track here, and then so on the hinds they're going to be pointed outward and fairly close. I'm sorry, the front they're going to be pointed outward, and on the hinds the dew claws are going to be further back and pointed straight forward instead. And so here, dew claws they're pointed outward and they're close. Here again, they're pointed outward and they're close. But then up here, they're way further back and they're angled straight forward. And same with right there. See how those dew claws are angled straight forward? And they're further back. And so just from the dew claws, you can tell that we have a front, hind situation.
I totally talked myself through that and wrote it down and then talked myself out of it. I went back there, up in there, you know.
Yeah.
And can you repeat that all?
So you're going with a lope and a left hind?
Or gallop.
Gallop and left hind?
Yes.
At a gallop, they start. When they're walking, we're not talking.
Which hind is it?
Yeah, so and actually it's a physiological or morphological thing, right? On the foot, and I can actually show a picture of that, if that would be helpful.
And at a gallop or lope.
Well, that's different. I'm just talking about the feet
In general.
Same thing.
No, you got
We did the same thing.
Well,
Did you do the same with the gallop?
oh, okay. And lope or gallop is the okay.
Yeah. So here's the front and hind foot of a deer, and so the front right there, the hind. See the space is much bigger too. So if anyone want to look at this, they can pass it around. But it shows the front and hind feet of a deer. This deer was nice enough to lend me his feet.
After somebody shot it.
Anyone want that?
Yeah.
Sure, go for it.
So then, as you were saying,
So
you're going to see these are pointing.
There's a front and a
so
hind.
the
This is
front feet
front,
are going to,
this is
the dew claws are
See
going
how
to
the
be
dew claws
closer
are
to
really
the
closer?
the hoof
Farther.
and angled outward.
They're going to go.
Yeah. Versus on the hinds, they tend to be further away and they tend to be more straight in line. You usually don't see dew claws unless you're in a gallop or a fast trot or in deep mud or something. So because does that make sense to people? Are people generally on board? So we ruled out that this could be a walk or a trot because we're not having that consistent groups of 2 tracks, that pattern of 2 tracks. Instead we're having this pattern of 4 tracks in this group, and the pattern here is front, hind. Now, sometimes people get confused over gallop versus lope. If you're confused over that, that's a good thing because that means you've looked into it enough to realize there's a whole lot of variation and there's reasons to be confused by that. Every animal's body is different and they move. The pattern of tracks that are left on the ground vary from species to species based on whether it's a lope or a gallop. And the technical definition of a lope or gallop is that in a gallop there are 2 periods of air time, and in a lope there is 1, where all 4 feet are off the ground, right? And so in this one, here's the front feet, bam, bam, and then they lift off their front feet. There's this little hop, and the hinds land right here, right? So that's the air time here. The question is, was there air time between the groups of tracks over here? If there was, then it's a gallop. If there wasn't, then it's a lope. And so the old pattern, the thing that's typically taught is, oh, if the hind foot is beyond this front foot, then it's a gallop, and if it's not, then it's a lope. Well, the funny thing is we're actually worried about whether or not there was air time over here. What's happening over here is less really related, but the general idea is that if the tracks are more spread out, the animal's moving faster, it's more likely to be a gallop. If they're closer together, it's moving slower, it's more likely to be a lope. In reality, if someone can explain to me why that matters, then I will try to understand how to tell them apart more. But really, what we're worried about is behavior of animals, and you're like, wow, this deer's moving super fast. That's important to know. There's something going on. A lope can be more of a traveling gait. These 2 feet, not these 2, back here, these 2, so here's the 2 fronts, and then there would be another group back here. These 2 feet in a lope hit the ground at the same time and take more of the weight of the body together. And so it's energetically more efficient, and so it can be used as a traveling gait. But I mean, really, a lot of this stuff is not. Really, the question is just: is it moving fast or slow? Or
So is lope incorrect?
Lope or gallop are fine.
But also, I think it's kind of cool to note top speed versus not top speed. You
Yes.
know, so this animal is, you know, not moving at the fastest it could possibly move,
Yeah, because of the distance.
which is another extreme. You know.
Yeah.
Um,
At the fastest this animal could move in this whole circle, we might have one track.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
you're saying
kinda what I
they're more spread out, but the faster it's moving, the group of tracks is going to be closer together, right? And then the sets of tracks will be farther. Like he's landing.
no.
No, just
No?
everything just
Everything
gets
will
further
get
and further and spread out.
The
yeah.
groups and the distance between. You know, all
I've heard that before.
Okay,
I've
okay,
heard
yeah,
it
no,
too.
a certain
that's
point,
good,
because
right.
there's only so far that fronts
Right.
can
Yeah,
stretch
yeah,
from each
yeah,
other and
yeah.
behinds, but
Sure.
And I mean, right,
That's
an
it.
animal can be moving really fast and doing like a prompt where all 4
Right.
feet are bouncing,
Mhm.
and in that case, yeah, you
Yeah.
have those four tracks close together.
you ever see that?
Yeah.
Dude?
You don't see it in whitetail. They won't do that. Yeah.
So when the legs are scissoring, that's like a continuous.
Yeah.
When it's the body is broken.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So a continuous pattern, legs are scissoring, and on the ground you end up with 2 tracks, groups of 2. So front and hind, front and hind, front and hind, front and hind, and the distance between those pairs will be consistent the whole way
Okay,
down.
you said when the leg scissor, it's continuous.
Yeah,
So the body scissors is broken.
right. Clear as sand.